I am Nia, 34 years old, and for my entire life I was the designated punching bag for my wealthy Atlanta family. As a highly sought-after crisis management consultant, I fixed disasters for major corporations, yet I could never fix the toxicity inside my own home. Today that changes. If you have ever been the black sheep of your family, mocked by the people who should love you the most, hit the like button and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. This is the story of how a single red envelope dismantled an empire. Come on, Nia, give us a sad face for the followers. Jessica's shrill voice pierced the heavy silence of the grand foyer. She was holding her phone high, perfectly angling the camera to capture my worn leather duffel bag against the backdrop of the mansion's sweeping marble staircase. Beside her stood Marcus, my older brother, by 2 years swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. He chuckled, adjusting his designer watch, a watch paid for by my parents' endless generosity toward their golden boy. Let her be Jess. She is probably just realizing she will have to downgrade from our guest wing to a shoebox apartment downtown. It is a tough adjustment for someone who never quite made the cut. I zipped my bag shut, the metallic sound sharp and final. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply stared at them, absorbing the cruelty that had been the soundtrack of my life. Growing up in Buckhead, Atlanta, meant our family projected an image of Southern perfection and old money grace. But behind the iron gates and the manicured hedges, the reality was freezing cold. Marcus was the heir apparent, the son who could do no wrong, even when he crashed 3 luxury cars before he turned 25. I was the quiet, observant daughter, the one whose academic scholarships were dismissed as try-hard behavior. "Are you going to post that?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Jessica smirked, her perfectly glossed lips curving into a sneer. "Absolutely. Saying goodbye to the family freeloader. Hashtag new beginnings. Hashtag Marcus and Jess takeover. My followers love authentic family drama." "You really have no shame, do you?" I asked, looking directly at my brother. "You sold my consulting firm's intellectual property to your competitors to cover your gambling debts, and you are letting your wife turn my departure into a social media spectacle." Marcus took a slow sip of his bourbon, leaning against the mahogany console table. "Oh, Nia, always so dramatic. It was not your property. You built it while living under this roof. That makes it family property. I just leveraged our assets to secure my new venture. Mom and Dad understand business. That is why they asked you to leave. You are too emotional, too hostile. You do not fit the family brand." This was not the first time Marcus had stolen from me. Nor was it the first time he had twisted the narrative to make me the villain. I remembered being 18, standing in the kitchen, holding my shredded acceptance letter to Yale. Marcus had destroyed it, claiming he mistook it for junk mail simply because he had been rejected the week before. When I confronted him, our mother had pulled me aside, her grip bruising my arm. "Do not ruin your brother's self-esteem right now, Nia. You can go to a state school. It is not a big deal." That was the moment I learned my success was an insult to his mediocrity. The heavy oak doors of the study opened, and our mother Eleanor stepped into the foyer. She wore her signature cashmere cardigan, her face pulled into an expression of weary disappointment. "What is all this noise, Marcus? Jessica, please no photos in the foyer. The lighting is terrible." She did not look at me until she had to. "Nia, are you still here? I thought you would be packed by noon. We have guests arriving for dinner, and I do not want any lingering awkwardness." "Do not worry, Mom," Marcus chimed in. "She was just giving us a guilt trip about the business deal, as usual." Eleanor sighed, rubbing her temples. "Nia, we have discussed this. Your brother needed the capital. You are a smart girl. You can easily start another project. But Marcus has a family to support now. You need to stop being so selfish and look at the bigger picture. We asked you to leave because your resentment is disrupting the harmony of this house." I looked at the three of them, a united front of delusion and entitlement. They truly believed I was a defeated woman, retreating to lick her wounds. They had no idea that for the past 6 months, I had been quietly tracking Marcus's new venture. I knew exactly who he sold my data to, and more importantly, I knew he had used this very mansion as collateral for a high-interest unregulated bridge loan to fund his failing startup. He thought he was brilliant. He was actually bankrupt. And when his creditors came knocking, I was the one who answered the door. I had used my offshore accounts amassed from years of highly lucrative discreet consulting contracts to buy out his debt. I reached into my tailored blazer and pulled out a thick crimson envelope. The vibrant color stood out starkly against the muted neutral tones of the mansion. "What is that?" Jessica asked, pausing her typing. "A goodbye card. We do not want it." I walked over to the glass coffee table in the center of the foyer and let the red envelope drop. It landed with a soft, heavy thud. "It is not a card, Jessica," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "It is a notice of foreclosure and an eviction mandate." Marcus scoffed, though his eyes darted nervously to the envelope. "What are you talking about? We own this house. Dad paid it off years ago." "Dad paid it off," I corrected, "but you secretly leveraged the deed last month to secure your bridge loan from Apex Capital. You forged his signature, Marcus. You risked everything to cover up your losses." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Marcus, is this true?" Marcus turned pale, the smiles evaporating from his face. "Apex Capital. How do you know about Apex? They promised absolute discretion. They value discretion." I agreed, offering a razor-sharp smile. "But they value cash more. I bought your debt, Marcus. Every single cent of it. I own the loan. I own the deed to this house. And because you are currently in default, I am exercising my right to seize the asset." I pointed to the red envelope. "Inside you will find the legal documentation along with a 24-hour notice to vacate the premises. My security team will be arriving tomorrow morning to change the locks." Jessica dropped her phone. The clatter of the device hitting the marble floor was the only sound in the room. "You cannot do this. This is our home," she shrieked, looking at Eleanor for support. "Mom, she is lying. Tell her she cannot do this," Marcus stammered, stepping toward our mother. But Eleanor was staring at the red envelope, her face drained of all color, finally realizing that the golden boy had burned their kingdom to the ground. "I strongly suggest you start packing, Marcus," I said, hoisting my duffel bag onto my shoulder. "You have a lot of bags to fill, and judging by your track record, you are not very good at planning ahead." Without waiting for their protests, their tears, or their inevitable lies, I turned my back on the people who had spent a lifetime trying to break me. I walked out of the heavy oak doors, stepping into the warm Atlanta sun. I did not shed a single tear. I did not need to. For the first time in 34 years, I was exactly where I belonged, in complete control. My phone began vibrating against the polished marble kitchen island at exactly 6 in the morning. I took a slow sip of black coffee, watching the screen light up with Marcus's name. 10 missed calls, 15 frantic text messages. Jessica sent angry voice notes that I had no intention of playing. I let the phone ring 3 more times before answering. I did not say hello. I simply listened to the chaos erupting on the other end. "Nia, call them off right now!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with a panic I had never heard from him before. "There are 2 black SUVs parked outside the front gate. Men in suits are unbolting the wrought iron." "I never bluff, Marcus," I replied calmly. The red envelope was quite clear. You had 24 hours to vacate. It seems you spent that time leaving me voicemails instead of packing your designer suits. "We are not leaving," Jessica shrieked in the background. "I have a brand partnership video to shoot by the pool at noon. You are ruining my schedule." "Your schedule is the least of your concerns, Jessica," I said. "By noon, that pool will belong to me." "You bought my bridge loan fine," Marcus interrupted, breathing heavily. "But you cannot seize the house. Dad owns the deed. My loan was just secured against a fraction of the equity. You are going to jail for fraud, Nia." I smiled softly. "Look at the transaction records from 4 years ago, Marcus. Look for an LLC called Crimson Holdings." Silence stretched across the line. I could hear the faint sound of paper rustling as Marcus frantically checked whatever documents he had scattered across the mahogany console table. "Crimson Holdings," Marcus muttered. "That is the company that bought the mortgage when Dad refinanced." "Wait, how do you know the name of the holding company?" "Dad did not refinance 4 years ago," I stated clearly, letting the truth drop like an anvil. "He went bankrupt. He gambled away the family reserves on terrible commercial real estate investments. The bank foreclosed on the mansion. You were too busy partying in Mykonos to notice the foreclosure notices taped to the front door. That is a complete lie. My mother Eleanor's voice suddenly came onto the line. She must have picked up the extension in the study. Your father paid off this house. We have lived here for 30 years. You are speaking absolute nonsense, Nia. Mom, you and Dad hid the bankruptcy to save your precious social standing in Buckhead, I countered. But you needed a buyer to save the house from going to public auction. So Crimson Holdings stepped in. An anonymous corporate buyer that allowed you to stay in the mansion as renters under a strict lease agreement. An agreement you thought was a secret. How do you know all this? Eleanor demanded, her voice losing its usual refined edge. Because I am Crimson Holdings. I revealed, feeling a rush of absolute vindication. I used the profits from my first major consulting buyout to secretly purchase the foreclosed mortgage. I saved you from homelessness 4 years ago. You have been living in my house, sleeping under my roof, and paying me rent without even realizing it. No, Marcus gasped. No, that is entirely impossible. You did not have that kind of money back then. I did, I replied. I just did not flaunt it. While you were crashing luxury cars and demanding Dad cover your tracks, I was building an empire in the shadows. Do you remember my 18th birthday, Mom? You told me I had to start paying you $500 a month in rent for my childhood bedroom to teach me responsibility. Meanwhile, you gave Marcus a platinum credit card the very same day. Well, consider this my final lesson in responsibility for the golden boy. Nia, please. Eleanor begged, the arrogance entirely stripped from her voice. We are your family. You cannot throw your own mother onto the street. Where will we go? What will we tell our friends? You can tell them the truth, I suggested. That your favorite son forged a deed to a house he did not own, trying to leverage it for an unregulated loan to cover his gambling debts. You handed them a fraudulent deed, Marcus. That is a federal crime. You set me up, Marcus yelled. You let me apply for that loan knowing the deed was fake. I did not forge Dad's signature, Marcus. You did, I reminded him. I just bought the debt from Apex Capital before they could report you to the authorities. I hold the note, I hold the deed, and I hold the evidence of your forgery, so you have a choice to make right now. What choice? Jessica sobbed into the phone. Just tell us what you want. I want you out, I commanded, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. The security team will give you exactly 1 hour to gather your personal belongings. Anything left behind becomes property of Crimson Holdings. If you argue, if you drag your feet, or if you try to take any of the art or furniture that legally belongs to the estate, I will hand the forgery evidence over to the district attorney. Nia, you are destroying us, my mother cried. Your father is going to have a massive heart attack when he hears about this. Dad already knows, I revealed, delivering the final blow. Who do you think signed the original lease agreement with Crimson Holdings 4 years ago? He knew exactly who bailed him out. He just begged me never to tell you because his fragile ego could not handle his wife and son, knowing his despised daughter was their savior. The line went dead silent. You have 59 minutes left, I said softly. I suggest you start running. I disconnected. Losing the house wasn't the worst thing happening today. They had no idea I was just getting started. It was time to look at the family business. The screen illuminated with another incoming call. The caller ID displayed Jessica's name. I slid into the driver's seat and pressed the answer button. I placed the phone on the dashboard mount, letting the Bluetooth connect. I did not say a word, simply waiting for the inevitable explosion. You listen to me, you vindictive, bitter woman, Jessica hissed through the speakers. The polished influencer persona she projected online was completely gone, replaced by a raw, vicious tone. You think you can just march here and take our home. You think you are so smart with your secret companies and offshore accounts. It is my home, Jessica, I stated calmly, starting the engine. I paid for it. You have been living in it for free. I am simply reclaiming my property. You are jealous, she snapped. You have always been jealous of Marcus, and you are jealous of me. You are pulling this aggressive, angry black woman routine because you cannot handle the fact that we are building a brand and you are just a lonely consultant. You people always try to tear down success instead of building your own. I paused, gripping the steering wheel. Jessica called me using blatant microaggressions to mask her own failures. You people, I repeated softly. I suggest you watch your mouth. You are currently standing in my foyer, surrounded by my walls, breathing my air. Do not test my patience today. I do not have to watch anything, she sneered. You clearly do not understand who you are dealing with. My father is a senior partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. I am warning you right now, my powerful buckhead lawyer father will crush you in court. He will tie you up in litigation until you beg to give us the house back. He destroys people like you before breakfast. Your father specializes in corporate mergers, Jessica. I calmly corrected her. He is not a real estate attorney, and he certainly does not handle fraud cases. But if you want to call him and explain that your husband forged a deed to secure a fraudulent bridge loan, be my guest. I am sure a senior partner will be thrilled to be an accessory after the fact. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by shuffling. Nia, please, you have to stop this immediately. My mother's voice echoed through the car. She had snatched the phone from Jessica. Brenda demanded that I drop the eviction to save our family's reputation in the African American elite church community. Do you have any idea what this will do to us? We have a standing to maintain. Your standing is a lie, Brenda, I replied, using her first name instead of calling her mom. The shift in my language was deliberate, a final severing of the maternal bond she weaponized against me for decades. You have been living a lie for 4 years. Crimson Holdings saved your reputation when Dad gambled away the mortgage. I saved your reputation. But evicting us today is going to ruin everything, she pleaded, her voice thick with panic. The congregation will find out. The bishop will know. We are hosting the annual charity gala next month. What will I tell the committee? What will I tell the Women's Auxiliary Board? You are humiliating us. You humiliated yourselves, I answered, merging onto the highway. Marcus committed a felony. You enabled him. Jessica cheered him on. I am just the consequence you never saw coming. Nia, I am begging you, Brenda cried, abandoning her usual refined tone. Give us a month. Give us a week. You cannot just throw us out onto the street like trash. We are your family. We are supposed to protect each other. You should have thought about protecting each other when you let Marcus steal my company's data, I said smoothly. You have 45 minutes left. Do not forget to pack your pearl necklaces, Brenda. You will need them to clutch when the security team arrives. Without waiting for another word, I hung up the phone. The silence in the car was beautiful. It was the sound of absolute freedom. I felt no guilt. I had spent 34 years shrinking myself to make them comfortable, financing their delusions and swallowing their insults. The debt was finally called in. Seizing the mansion was only the first phase. Marcus had stolen my intellectual property to fund a venture, but he was not smart enough to execute it alone. He needed a pretty face to market it. He needed Jessica. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator. I drove straight toward Jessica's brand new business. She had recently opened a luxury wellness and beauty boutique in Midtown, a massive storefront offering high-end treatments, organic skincare lines, and exclusive memberships. She relentlessly promoted the grand opening on her social media platforms, bragging about being a self-made entrepreneur. She neglected to mention her initial capital came from the unregulated loan Marcus secured with my house. The boutique was a monument to her vanity, featuring crystal chandeliers, imported marble floors, and a wall dedicated to her Instagram photos. It was actually her biggest vulnerability. I pulled into the reserved VIP parking spot right in front of the boutique's massive glass doors. I turned off the engine, smoothing the lapels of my blazer. I had spent months tracking the supply chain, vendor contracts, and lease agreements for this specific business. Jessica thought she was a genius businesswoman because she could exploit her followers, but she completely ignored the fine print. In the corporate world, the fine print is always where the trap is set. I stepped out of my car and locked all of the doors, the bright midday sun reflecting off the boutique's gold-plated sign. It was time to show my sister-in-law what a real corporate takeover looked like. The glass doors slid open, engulfing me in the scent of eucalyptus and ambition. Jessica spared nothing for the grand opening of Luminescence Medical Spa. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne, while a string quartet played pop songs. Atlanta's elite were out in full force. I recognized politicians, television stars, and real estate developers mingling around marble water features. Flashbulbs went off every few seconds near a massive flower wall featuring Jessica's logo in pink lights. It was a curated illusion of success funded by my stolen intellectual property and a fraudulent loan against my house. I walked past the velvet rope, ignoring the hostess holding a VIP clipboard. I did not need an invitation to a business I was about to dismantle. It did not take long for them to spot me. I was a dark cloud in their sea of pastel dresses and smiles. Marcus stood near the center of the room, holding court with a group of investors. He nudged our mother Brenda, who was sipping a mimosa. Her head snapped in my direction, and blood drained from her face, leaving her heavy makeup unnatural. She whispered to Marcus, who abandoned his conversation and marched toward me. Brenda followed closely behind, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. They moved with the panic of people trying to contain a fire before guests noticed the smoke. But I was not there to be contained. "What are you doing here?" Marcus hissed, stepping directly into my path. "Are you out of your mind? We have heavy hitters here today. You are not going to ruin Jessica's moment." Brenda grabbed my arm nails, digging into my sleeve. "You need to leave right this instant," she demanded in a harsh whisper. "You have already done enough damage with that ridiculous eviction stunt. Do not humiliate us in front of these people. They are our friends. You showing up looking so bitter is proving everyone right about you. You have always been jealous of your brother's success, and now you cannot stand to see Jessica shine. Walk out before I call security." I looked down at Brenda's hand, gripping my arm, and locked eyes with her until she let go. "Security works for the building owner," I replied calmly. "And if you read Jessica's commercial lease, you would know Apex Capital owns this building. The same Apex Capital whose debt I just purchased. If anyone is getting escorted out, it will not be me." Marcus swallowed hard, his bravado failing. Before he could respond, the string quartet stopped playing. A sharp tap on a microphone echoed through the room. Jessica stood on a raised acrylic platform near the flower wall, beaming under the spotlight. She tapped the microphone again, clearing her throat to gather the attention of the crowd. "Thank you all for coming today," Jessica announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. The crowd applauded politely. Building Luminescence has been a journey of passion, dedication, and entirely independent success. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd until they locked onto me. A cruel, triumphant smirk crossed her face. She could not resist the urge to perform. "It takes a village to build an empire. I want to thank my incredible husband Marcus, and my wonderful mother, Brenda. I even see my sister Nia in the back. Nia has always struggled to find her footing, and it is sweet of her to come see what hard work looks like. We should all be supportive of family, even those who have lost their way." A pitying murmur rippled through the audience. A few people turned to look at me with sympathetic smiles. Marcus smirked, puffing out his chest. He thought I would shrink away, embarrassed by the public condescension. Instead, I stepped around him. I walked slowly and deliberately down the center aisle, my shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. The crowd parted automatically, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Jessica's smile faltered as I approached the platform, but she held her ground, gripping the microphone. I climbed the 2 acrylic steps and stopped inches away from her. Without saying a word, I reached out and firmly took the microphone from her trembling hand. She gasped, stepping back, completely unsure of how to handle an unscripted moment. I turned to the crowd, my voice echoing loudly through the sound system. "Thank you, Jessica, for that touching introduction," I said, projecting absolute authority. "She is right. Real hard work is a beautiful thing to witness. Unfortunately, you will not find any of it here today. I am Nia Wilson, a senior crisis management consultant and the actual owner of the intellectual property that funded this establishment." Gasps erupted across the room. I pointed directly at Marcus, who was frozen in horror near the bar. "My brother Marcus forged our father's signature on a deed to secure a fraudulent bridge loan from Apex Capital. He used those illegal funds to build this spa for his wife. He is not a brilliant investor. He is a criminal who stole his sister's data to pay off massive gambling debts." The room erupted into frantic whispering. Cell phones were suddenly raised, recording every second of the spectacle. And to Brenda, my mother, who stands there watching. I continued looking directly at her pale, terrified face. You enabled this theft to protect your golden boy. You demanded I stay quiet to preserve your precious social standing. But the truth always comes out. I bought Marcus's debt this morning. I own the fraudulent loan, and I own the commercial lease to this building. I turned back to Jessica, who was openly weeping, her perfect influencer facade shattered. You are not an independent entrepreneur, Jessica. You are a beneficiary of fraud. Consider this your official public eviction notice. You have until midnight to clear out the equipment before I lock the doors for good. I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a loud screech. The takedown was complete. The piercing feedback faded, leaving a suffocating silence across the marble floor. Every politician, TV star, and socialite stared at me. No one spoke. Jessica stood frozen, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the pink glow of her logo. She looked at the crowd, her lips trembling as she formulated a sentence. She is lying, Jessica shrieked, her voice cracking. Security, remove her immediately. She is a jealous, bitter woman trying to ruin my brand. I paid for everything here. I hold the receipts. I am a successful, self-made woman. I did not flinch. I slowly walked down the acrylic steps, maintaining absolute authority. I reached into my blazer and withdrew a black leather folder. You hold receipts for cosmetic renovations, Jessica. I corrected smoothly, projecting my voice. You paid for crystal chandeliers, eucalyptus displays, and velvet ropes. But you do not own a single piece of the medical machinery that makes this a functional medical spa. Marcus pushed through the crowd, his face flushed red with anger. He pointed a trembling finger at me. Stop this right now, Nia. You cannot seize the equipment. I negotiated the leases myself with an overseas distributor. We have ironclad contracts. You are bluffing just to embarrass us. You negotiated with a shell company, Marcus, I replied, facing my brother. Did you really think a European manufacturer would lease expensive lasers to a man with terrible credit and massive gambling debts? They demanded a high-level corporate guarantor to underwrite the importation process. They demanded financial security. I opened the folder, pulling out crisp, legally binding documents. You needed a shadow guarantor with an impeccable corporate rating to secretly back your fraudulent venture. Enter Apex Luxury Logistics. You thought you found an anonymous venture capital firm willing to underwrite the risk. You never bothered to research the corporate officers. If you had, you would have seen my signature on the master agreements. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Luxury Logistics. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. A prominent commercial real estate developer standing near the front actually pulled out his glasses to stare at me with intense respect. I backed the lease, I stated, walking toward Jessica, who was gripping a water feature for support. And according to the strict terms of that commercial lease, the guarantor maintains the right to revoke the underwriting agreement at any time, particularly if the primary leaseholder is engaged in financial fraud, which Marcus absolutely is. You cannot do this, Jessica screamed, abandoning her polished influencer persona entirely. I have exclusive clients booked for tomorrow. I have paid famous influencers expecting free laser treatments. My brand is built around this equipment. You are destroying my life. You destroyed your own life the moment you conspired with my brother to steal my intellectual property, I answered coldly. I am exercising my corporate rights. Effective 10 minutes ago, Apex Luxury Logistics revoked the financial guarantee. The equipment is in default. Because the machinery belongs to an international distributor, the repossession process is immediate. As if on cue, the heavy glass doors at the front of the boutique slid open. The string quartet hastily scrambled out of the way. 4 uniformed Atlanta police officers strode into the lobby. Behind them marched a team of 6 men wearing dark blue utility shirts bearing the logo of a commercial repossession agency. They pushed heavy-duty dollies and carried moving straps. Brenda, hiding near the champagne bar, let out a wail. She rushed toward the police officers, her pearl necklace bouncing. "Officers, please! You must arrest that woman!" she cried, pointing a manicured finger at me. "She is trespassing and threatening our family business. We are upstanding citizens of Buckhead." The lead officer ignored Brenda completely, disregarding her dramatic performance. He walked straight toward me, recognizing me from the legal briefings I had coordinated earlier. "Ms. Wilson," he asked respectfully, We have the court-approved seizure mandate. Are the premises secure? They are, I confirmed, handing him the documentation. The targets include 3 fractional laser stations, 2 full-body cryotherapy chambers, and 4 specialized body sculpting machines located in the rear treatment rooms. The officer nodded and signaled the repossession team. The men bypassed the velvet ropes and headed down the main hallway toward the treatment rooms. No! Jessica shrieked, sprinting after the repo men. She threw her arms around the nearest laser machine. Do not touch my property. You cannot take this. I am a brand ambassador. I will sue all of you. I will expose you to my millions of dedicated followers. One of the police officers approached her firmly. Ma'am, you need to step away from the equipment immediately. We have a legal mandate to secure these assets. If you physically interfere with a court-ordered repossession, you will be arrested for obstruction and hauled out in handcuffs. Jessica looked wildly at Marcus, silently begging him to intervene, to be the wealthy husband he always pretended to be. But Marcus retreated. He took 2 steps backward, putting distance between himself and his wife. He looked down at the floor, refusing to meet her desperate gaze. Marcus, do something. Jessica pleaded, tears ruining her expensive makeup. Call your lawyer. Call someone. I cannot, Marcus muttered weakly, his voice barely a whisper. She holds all the debt, Jessica. She owns the house. She owns the lease. It is over. The guests rapidly fled to avoid being associated with a public bankruptcy. I watched the repo men unplug the machines, wrap them in blankets, and load them onto dollies. They rolled the massive devices right past Jessica, leaving behind empty rooms and shattered illusions. Brenda wept softly, completely devastated. Marcus stared blankly, realizing his status could not save him from federal fraud implications. Jessica remained broken. I adjusted my blazer, feeling absolute closure wash over me. I walked out the front door to build my bright new independent future entirely on my own successful terms today. The bright midday sun momentarily blinded me as I stepped onto the pavement. I did not make it to my car before the heavy glass doors of the boutique violently crashed open behind me. Heavy footsteps pounded against the concrete. Marcus was sprinting toward me, his face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He had lost his business, his pride, and his wife's respect all in the span of 30 minutes. Now he was looking for a physical target for his humiliation. You vindictive witch! Marcus screamed, closing the distance between us with alarming speed. He raised his fist, stepping into my personal space, fully intending to strike me right there in the parking lot. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I simply reached into my pocket and pressed a button on my key fob. A loud, piercing siren chirped twice from the street corner. Marcus froze, his raised fist hovering in the air, his eyes darting toward the sound. I highly recommend you lower your hand, Marcus, I said, my voice eerily calm and entirely devoid of fear. Because if you touch me, the police will add assault to the incredibly long list of charges you are already facing today. Marcus lowered his arm, though his chest heaved with heavy, ragged breaths. You took everything from me. He spat, his voice trembling with a mix of fury and despair. You ruined my life. You ruined your own life the moment you decided my identity was yours to exploit. I corrected him sharply. Speaking of which, did you really think I would only look into the commercial lease and the bridge loan? Marcus blinked, the anger in his eyes suddenly replaced by a creeping, cold dread. What are you talking about? I gestured toward the far end of the parking lot. His new Porsche was parked there. He had flaunted it on social media for weeks. It sat conspicuously in a VIP spot gleaming under the Atlanta sun. Beautiful car, I noted casually. It is a shame you do not actually own it. Marcus swallowed hard. I bought that car. I have the paperwork. You have paperwork. I agreed, opening my folder. But it is not your paperwork. When I initiated the audit on your bridge loan, the accountants flagged other anomalies. It turns out you have been very busy. I pulled out a white document. This is the financing agreement for the Porsche. The dealership required a co-signer because your credit score was completely destroyed. You needed someone with impeccable financial standing to secure the loan. Marcus turned pale, looking wildly around. The guests who had fled the med spa were now lingering near their own vehicles, watching our confrontation. High society loves a scandal, especially when it happens to someone else. You somehow forged my signature on sales documents listing himself as having power of attorney, I said. You stole my social security number and falsified my income statements. Keep your voice down, Marcus hissed, glancing nervously at the wealthy onlookers recording us with their phones. We can settle this quietly. There is no settling this, I replied, raising my voice so the spectators could hear every single word. My entire family had conspired against me. You all thought you could use me as a blank check. But what your brother did constitutes multiple felonies: forgery, fraud, filing false documents, identity theft. Brenda burst through the boutique doors, rushing toward us. She had clearly heard the commotion. Nia, stop this, she pleaded, grabbing my arm. You are embarrassing the family. I shook her off, looking at her with absolute disgust. My parents had witnessed the signatures, effectively validating the forgery. Did you really think you could co-sign his lies and walk away clean, Brenda? The district attorney had added charges of conspiracy against them for knowingly witnessing fraudulent documents. Brenda gasped, covering her mouth as the reality of her complicity crashed down upon her. She finally realized that protecting her golden boy was going to cost her her own freedom. Each charge carries significant penalties, I reminded them both. And I notified the bank regarding the fraudulent car loan at 8 o'clock this morning. Right on cue, the low rumbling growl of a heavy-duty diesel engine echoed through the parking lot. A massive flatbed tow truck rounded the corner, its amber lights flashing brightly against the surrounding buildings. The words Apex Recovery Services were painted in bold white letters across the side of the truck. Marcus watched in absolute horror as the tow truck bypassed the regular parking spaces and backed up directly toward his custom Porsche. Two men in high-visibility vests jumped out of the cab. They did not hesitate. They immediately began unspooling thick steel cables and attaching heavy hooks to the undercarriage of the luxury sports car. "Hey, get away from my car!" Marcus yelled, sprinting toward the tow truck drivers. "You cannot take that. I paid the deposit." One of the drivers, a burly man with a thick beard, held up a clipboard. "We have a bank order for immediate repossession due to loan fraud. Step back, sir, or we will call the authorities." Marcus froze, entirely impotent. I was trapped. If he fought the repo men, the police would arrive and discover the forgery. He stood there, shoulders slumped, watching his ultimate status symbol being winched up onto the flatbed. The hydraulic gears whined loudly, a mechanical symphony marking the complete destruction of Marcus's fabricated life. The wealthy guests who had previously admired him were now whispering behind their hands, shaking their heads in mock pity. In Buckhead, losing your money was a tragedy. Being exposed as a fraud was an unforgivable social sin. Marcus was instantly blacklisted from every country club and investment circle in the city. "You have absolutely nothing left," I said, walking up behind him as the tow truck secured the Porsche. Marcus collapsed onto the hot concrete, burying his face in his hands as the tow truck disappeared around the corner. I turned away from him, feeling the satisfying weight of absolute closure, but my phone immediately vibrated in my pocket. The caller ID displayed the name of my father. Calvin Wilson rarely called me directly. He preferred to use Brenda as his messenger, maintaining his fragile image as the untouchable patriarch of our family. I answered the call, bringing the cold phone to my ear without saying a single word. He was not calling to offer any kind of apology. "You have made a grave mistake today, Nia Tao," Calvin announced. His deep, booming voice echoed loudly through the small speaker. He sounded completely unfazed by the total destruction of the life of his son. "You think you can dismantle this entire family and walk away untouched? You actually think your little corporate games make you entirely untouchable? I strongly suggest you come to the house this Sunday for dinner. We have pressing matters to discuss, specifically regarding the Wilson Family Trust." I reminded him that the house belonged to me now and Marcus had forged the original property deed today. "There is absolutely nothing left to discuss," I told him, walking toward my parked car. "You are wrong," he replied smoothly. "You may own the holding company that bought the foreclosed mortgage, but you are forgetting the generational trust my own father established exactly 30 years ago." I spent the last hour reviewing the original bylaws with my highly paid attorneys. There is a specific morality clause, Nia. A strict stipulation that any beneficiary who acts with malicious intent to publicly disgrace the family name can be entirely stripped of all their assets, including businesses, funded by initial family capital. You used your initial college fund to start your consulting firm. That makes your entire empire completely vulnerable to the trust jurisdiction. I stopped moving, resting my hand heavily on the car door handle. He was bluffing, obviously trying to weaponize an antiquated legal document to regain absolute control. My firm is completely independent, I stated firmly. Your trust holds absolutely no jurisdiction over my offshore accounts or Apex Luxury Logistics. We will let the church elders decide that fate. Calvin countered, his tone dripping with pure and absolute authority. I have already spoken to Bishop Thomas and the council. They are deeply concerned about your spiritual welfare. They agree that your actions today reflect a broken, vindictive soul. A woman who would render her own brother completely homeless and destroy the business of her relative is clearly operating under malicious intent. We are convening a special dinner this Sunday after service. The respected elders will be present to mediate your repentance and oversee the direct transfer of your assets back to the family trust. If you refuse to attend, I will file the injunction on Monday morning and tie your businesses up in federal court for many long years. He hung up before I could respond. The audacity of the man was simply staggering. He was using the local church, the very institution he used to mask his terrible financial failures and moral bankruptcies, as a heavy weapon against me. Growing up, Calvin maintained a pristine reputation in the elite church community. He was the generous benefactor, the wise counselor, the man everyone turned to for guidance. Behind closed doors, he was a cold, calculating tyrant who turned a blind eye while Marcus stole my college acceptance letters and Brenda criticized my every move. I started my car engine. Calvin thought he could easily use the severe threat of lengthy litigation and public spiritual shaming to force me into submission. He wrongly assumed I would shrink under the disapproving gaze of Bishop Thomas and the other elders. He severely underestimated exactly how much hidden leverage I had spent the last 4 years accumulating. I spent the rest of the week fully preparing for the Sunday ambush. I did not waste precious time feeling anxious or intimidated. I treated Calvin and his threat like any other hostile corporate takeover. I quickly gathered my trusted legal team to initiate an investigation. We launched a deep forensic dive into the Wilson Family Trust and investigated the specific church elders Calvin claimed to have rallied. What I found was a web of pure hypocrisy, so dense it practically unraveled itself. The trust document Calvin was threatening me with was not just antiquated. It was actively being drained to secretly fund the lavish lifestyles of the very elders he had invited to dinner. Sunday afternoon arrived with a heavy, oppressive heat. I pulled my car up to the wrought iron gates of the mansion I now legally owned. The eviction mandate was still active. I had granted a temporary stay strictly for this dinner, knowing Calvin desperately needed his home turf to stage his grand performance. The driveway was fully lined with expensive luxury sedans belonging to the church council members. They were all here ready to participate in my public execution under the guise of spiritual guidance. I walked through the heavy oak doors and stepped into the grand dining room. The long mahogany table was beautifully set with Brenda and her finest crystal and silver. Calvin sat at the head of the table, flanked by Bishop Thomas and 3 senior church elders. Brenda sat to his right, looking tense but totally vindicated. Marcus and Jessica were conspicuously absent, likely hiding in the guest wing, to avoid facing me after their total humiliation earlier in the week. Nia, please take a seat, Calvin instructed, gesturing to the single empty chair at the opposite end of the vast table. He spoke to me like a wayward child. We are gathered here today not to punish you, but to completely save your soul from the deep bitterness that has clearly consumed it. The church elders have finally arrived to hear your apology and spiritual confession. I pulled out the mahogany chair and sat down, keeping my posture straight. I ignored the water glass and napkin. Bishop Thomas leaned forward, folding his hands. His voice carried the soothing cadence he used to extract tithes every Sunday. Nia, your father loves you deeply. We all do. He began, his eyes full of rehearsed pity. The Lord commands us to honor our parents. Seizing the family home and humiliating your brother are not the actions of a righteous woman. You are fracturing the sacred bond of family over worldly possessions. Calvin slowly slid a thick, heavy manila envelope completely across the polished mahogany table. Inside is a transfer of deed and relinquishment of corporate assets to the Wilson Family Trust, Calvin stated, revealing the cold businessman. Sign it, Nia. Surrender the properties and the LLC today, and we will pray for your redemption. You can keep your little consulting salary, but the real estate and commercial leases must be returned to the family. It is the only way to save your reputation in this community. Brenda nodded. Please, Nia. Do not make this harder. Just honor your father. I stared at the envelope. I had saved $2,000 from tutoring to buy a car. Calvin used religious guilt to convince me to donate my savings to Marcus. They told me it was my spiritual duty to support my brother. I gave them the money and took the bus for 4 years. They thought that scared teenager was sitting at this table today. They were mistaken. I am not broken, I stated firmly, and I am not signing anything today. The only fraud here is you, Calvin. Bishop Thomas gasped, gripping his gold cross. Such insolence, you dare disrespect your father and the church council. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a stack of red dossiers. I tossed one to the bishop and slid the other to Calvin. I dare, I replied smoothly, because I spent the last 3 days conducting a forensic audit of the Wilson Family Trust. The trust you claim is a sacred generational safeguard. Do you want to know what my team found, Bishop? Calvin's smug expression vanished. He reached for the dossier, his hands suddenly trembling. The trust is entirely bankrupt, I announced, making sure every elder heard me clearly. But it did not go bankrupt from bad market investments. Calvin has been systematically siphoning money from the church expansion fund, routing it through the Wilson Family Trust, and using it to pay off Marcus's gambling debts and Jessica's credit cards. You have been stealing from your congregation, Dad, to fund your Golden Boys' failures. The 3 senior elders, sitting directly beside Bishop Thomas, immediately stiffened, shooting incredibly alarmed glances at Calvin. Is this true, Calvin? Elder Davis demanded, his face turning an angry shade of red. Are you embezzling from the sanctuary fund? She is lying, Calvin roared. She fabricated these documents to destroy me. She is a bitter, vindictive child. My team includes 2 former IRS investigators. I countered calmly, leaning back in my chair. The wire transfers are fully documented on page 14. You moved over $400,000 in the past 2 years alone. And Bishop Thomas, if you look at page 20, you will see your own signature authorizing several of those mysterious transfers. It appears the bishop was taking a 10% consulting fee for looking the other way, while my father drained the accounts. Brenda let out a sharp, devastated cry. She looked at her husband, the man who constantly demanded absolute perfection, now fully exposed as a common thief. You have no right to access those records, Bishop Thomas shouted, abandoning his calm pastoral voice entirely. This is an illegal breach of privacy. I will have you arrested. You cannot arrest the primary account holder, Bishop, I replied with a razor-sharp smile. Did you forget when Calvin went bankrupt? I did not just buy the mortgage to this house. I also purchased the debt of his failing firm to keep him out of federal prison. I own the master accounts. I have legal access to every single ledger tied to his name. I stood up, adjusting my blazer. I looked down at the men who had used faith and authority to keep me subjugated. You brought me here today to intimidate me, I stated clearly. You thought you could demand I honor my father by surrendering my hard-earned properties. You thought you could shame me into financing your crimes one last time. But the era of me subsidizing this family's delusions is officially over forever. I pointed to the dossiers. I have submitted those exact accounting reports to the Internal Revenue Service and the State Attorney General. They are very interested in how a tax-exempt religious organization is funding luxury car leases and casino debts. You demanded I honor my father. I am honoring the truth instead. Calvin instantly slumped down into his heavy oak chair, his arrogant face completely drained of blood. The booming patriarch was gone, replaced by a terrified old man facing federal indictment. The elders were already frantically pulling out their cell phones, calling their lawyers to distance themselves from the bishop's impending downfall. "You have exactly 24 hours left on the eviction mandate," I reminded Brenda, who was uncontrollably weeping onto the expensive vintage lace tablecloth. "I suggest you spend less time crying and more time packing. The security team will not be gentle tomorrow." I turned my back on the pathetic tribunal and walked out of the room without any hesitation. As I reached the oak doors of the foyer, the flashing red and blue lights of multiple approaching police cruisers illuminated the stained glass windows, reflecting across the marble floors. They were not arriving here for the eviction today. They were here for the massive career-ending embezzlement that would finally send my father to federal prison where he truly belonged. Before the heavy oak doors could swing open to admit the authorities, Calvin stood up his chair, scraping against the hardwood floor. He was cornered, sweating, and completely out of options, yet he tried to rely on the only weapon he had left. He pointed a trembling finger at me, attempting to summon his pastoral authority one final time. "You are condemning your own flesh and blood to the authorities," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "The Lord commands us to forgive Nia. I built this church. I gave everything to this community. My generous donations built the community center and the new youth pavilion. You are destroying a man of God." I did not flinch at his pathetic display of righteous indignation. The police were waiting in the foyer, coordinating with my security team, giving me exactly 2 minutes to finish this conversation. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a second folder, this one thick with highlighted banking records. I slammed the bank statements directly onto the center of the mahogany table. The sharp crack echoed through the dining room, silencing Calvin instantly. "You want to talk about your generous church donations?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "Let us talk about exactly where that money came from." I slid the first bank statement toward him. It was dated 8 years ago. "When I was 26, I started my first consulting firm. I worked out of a tiny apartment, taking on multiple jobs to save every penny. I built a modest business account, saving $60,000 to fund my expansion. And then one morning, I woke up to find the account completely empty." Calvin swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the highlighted transaction numbers. Brenda, still wiping tears from her cheeks, looked up in confusion. "What are you talking about?" she asked weakly. "I am talking about the fact that my own father forged my signature to authorize a wire transfer," I explained, making sure the remaining church elders heard every single word before they fled the room. "You stole my startup capital, Calvin. You drained my business account to the absolute zero. When I confronted you back then, you told me the bank made an error and you promised to help me fix it. But you never did. You let me struggle, telling me that hardship builds character." "That was family money," Calvin muttered, trying to justify the unforgivable. "I needed to secure our standing in the church. The congregation expected a major contribution from our family. I used that money for the glory of the community. It was a spiritual investment." "It was theft," I corrected him sharply. "You used my hard-earned money to buy your way into the church council. You bought your influence with my sweat and tears. And then you had the absolute audacity to stand at the pulpit every Sunday and preach about honesty and integrity." I turned to Bishop Thomas, who was desperately trying to inch his way toward the side exit. "He did not just embezzle from the sanctuary fund recently. His original generous donation, the one that secured his position as a senior elder, was stolen directly from his daughter. What your father did constitutes multiple felonies, including forgery, fraud, filing false documents, and identity theft." I stated clearly, letting the legal realities sink into the room. Each charge carries significant penalties, and the statute of limitations for bank fraud of this magnitude has not expired. Calvin looked at the documents, his chest heaving. He had genuinely believed that his needs outweighed my rights, a fundamental value difference that I could finally understand without accepting. He had always viewed my success as a resource he could appropriate whenever he needed to cover his own failures. "You could have asked me," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the silence. If you were truly desperate, you could have come to me as a father and asked for a loan. But you did not. You chose to sneak into my accounts, forge my name, and watch me cry over my ruined business without showing a single ounce of remorse. You watched me take the bus for 4 years while you drove a luxury sedan bought with church funds and my stolen capital. Brenda buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Calvin, how could you do that to her? How could you steal from our own daughter? Do not act so innocent, Brenda, I snapped, turning my attention to my mother. You may not have forged the signature, but you knew. You are the one who handled the household accounting. You saw the sudden influx of $60,000. You knew exactly where it came from, and you stayed silent because you enjoyed the social prestige of being the wife of a generous benefactor. You both traded my future for a front row seat at Sunday service. The heavy oak doors of the dining room finally opened wide. 2 federal agents stepped inside, followed by a pair of uniformed local police officers. The flashing lights from outside cast long, chaotic shadows across the fine crystal and vintage lace tablecloth. Calvin Wilson, the lead federal agent asked, stepping forward with a pair of handcuffs glinting at his belt. We have a warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Calvin stumbled backward, bumping into his chair. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a sudden, pathetic terror. Nia, please. Tell them to wait. We can settle this privately. I will pay you back every cent. I will sell everything I have. You have nothing left to sell, Calvin, I reminded him coldly. I own the mansion. I own the business leases. You have 0 assets to your name. Your empire was built on stolen money and fragile lies. You spent your life demanding I honor my father. Today I honor the truth. The agents moved efficiently, stepping around the mahogany table to apprehend Calvin. He did not fight them. He simply went limp, all the bluster and arrogance completely stripped away as the cold steel handcuffs clicked securely around his wrists. Bishop Thomas and the remaining elders quickly scurried out of the room, eager to distance themselves from the toxic fallout that was about to hit the local news. You are destroying this family, Brenda wailed, reaching out toward Calvin as the agents led him toward the foyer. You are sending your father to jail. What will people say about us? They will say you were exactly who I always knew you were, I replied, gathering my briefcases from the table. For 34 years, you prioritized Marcus's needs over my rights. You prioritized your social standing over my success. You took everything from me and demanded that I smile and be grateful for the scraps. I walked past Brenda without offering a single comforting touch. She was clutching her pearl necklace, watching the ruins of her fake privileged life collapse into dust. The security team was already waiting in the hallway, ready to enforce the final hours of the eviction mandate. You have until tomorrow morning to clear your personal items out of my house, Brenda, I said, pausing at the threshold of the dining room. I strongly suggest you focus on packing instead of weeping. My patience officially expired today. Without looking back, I stepped out through the grand entrance and into the cool Atlanta evening. The air felt lighter. I took a deep breath, feeling the suffocating weight of my family's expectations finally lift off my shoulders. I had spent my entire life shrinking to make them comfortable, financing their delusions, and waiting for an apology that would never come. Today I had stopped waiting. I walked down the driveway, leaving the mansion behind me forever, ready to build a new empire entirely on my own terms. The crisp morning air did nothing to cool the frantic energy vibrating through Greater Grace Cathedral's parking lot. Less than 12 hours had passed since federal agents escorted Calvin Wilson out in handcuffs. I knew his defense attorney would arrange bail by sunrise, and I knew exactly where my father would go. For Calvin, the church was his fortress, his shield, and his primary source of unchecked power. He needed to control the narrative before the congregation caught wind of his arrest. I parked my car across the street, watching his black luxury sedan speed into the reserved spot near the administrative wing. He was walking fast, desperately trying to salvage his shattered reputation. I grabbed the heavy leather binder from my passenger seat. It contained every bank statement, forged wire transfer, and communication proving his embezzlement. I stepped out of my car and walked toward the cathedral doors, ready to deliver the final sermon. Inside the grand sanctuary, the silence was heavy. I bypassed the main worship hall and headed straight for the executive boardroom. Through the frosted glass double doors, I could hear Calvin's booming voice weaving a web of lies. I pushed the doors open without knocking. The long oak table was surrounded by the entire council of elders, including Pastor Evans. Calvin stood at the head of the table, sweating profusely, waving his hands in a theatrical display of righteous indignation. He froze the moment I walked in. The elders turned to look at me, their faces a mixture of shock and stern disapproval. Pastor Evans stood up, his expression unreadable, adjusting his silver-rimmed glasses. "Nia, this is a closed executive session," Pastor Evans stated, his deep voice echoing in the cavernous room. "Your father was just explaining the unfortunate misunderstanding with the authorities last night." "It is not a misunderstanding, Pastor Evans," I replied, walking confidently toward the center of the room. "It is a federal indictment for wire fraud and embezzlement. Calvin is here to convince you that I fabricated the evidence to ruin him." Calvin slammed his fist on the table, the sharp crack making several elders jump. "She is a vindictive child," he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "She is trying to destroy my life because she is jealous. Do not listen to her. The devil is using her to tear down this ministry." I did not raise my voice. I placed the heavy leather binder on the polished oak table and pushed it directly toward Pastor Evans. "You do not have to listen to me," I said calmly. "You just have to read the ledger." I brought the unredacted paper trail. It details exactly how Calvin funneled church expansion funds into a shell company to pay off Marcus's gambling debts. It also shows how he drained my personal startup accounts years ago and claimed those funds were his own generous donations. Pastor Evans looked at the binder as if it were a venomous snake. Slowly, he opened the cover. The room went dead silent as he turned the pages. I highlighted the corresponding account numbers, matching the outward transfers directly to Calvin's hidden accounts. I included the forged signatures and timestamps. I watched the pastor's face transform from skeptical to horrified. He passed a stack of bank statements to Elder Davis. Within minutes, the undeniable proof of Calvin's theft was circulating around the table. The holy facade my father had spent 3 decades meticulously building was burning to the ground. "Calvin," Pastor Evans whispered, his voice shaking with a profound sense of betrayal. "These are the sanctuary renovation funds. You told us the contractor went bankrupt, but you took it. You stole from the widows who tithe every week." "Pastor, please, you have to understand." Calvin pleaded, his patriarch persona completely vanishing. He took a step toward the pastor, his hands trembling. "I was going to put it back. The family was facing a cash flow issue. I needed to protect our standing in the community. I did it for the ministry." "You did it for your pride," I corrected him sharply. "You sacrificed everyone around you to maintain an illusion of wealth. You used the church as your piggy bank, and you used me as your scapegoat. The illusion ends today." Elder Davis dropped the papers in disgust. "This is an abomination," he declared, looking at Calvin with pure contempt. "You sat in these meetings and prayed over our finances while secretly robbing us blind. You have disgraced this institution." Pastor Evans stood up tall, his shoulders squared, radiating absolute and terrifying authority. He looked at Calvin with righteous fury. "Calvin Wilson, your actions are a direct violation of everything this church represents." Pastor Evans announced, his voice ringing with finality. "Effective immediately, you are stripped of your title as deacon. You are removed from the financial council and permanently banned from serving in any leadership capacity here. We will hand these documents over to our legal team to cooperate fully with the federal investigation." The words hit Calvin like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. His hands flew to his throat, pulling frantically at his expensive silk tie. "You cannot do this to me," he wheezed, his eyes wide with absolute terror. "I built this church. I am Deacon Wilson. You cannot take my title." He collapsed into a chair, gripping the armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. He was having a massive panic attack, unable to process the evaporation of his social standing. The men who had respected him were now looking at him like dirt. He was just a common thief facing prison time, stripped of the only identity that mattered to him. I turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving the ruined man to face the devastating consequences of his own greed. The wrought iron gates of the mansion stood wide open when I arrived. The eviction deadline was rapidly approaching, and the sprawling estate was a hive of chaotic activity. Moving trucks idled in the circular driveway, their ramps extended like metallic tongues. Movers carried heavy antique furniture, Persian rugs, and boxes of designer clothing out the front doors. I parked my car near the fountain, watching the frantic dismantling of the empire my family had falsely claimed as their own. I did not feel pity. I felt the profound comes from finally standing in the light of the truth. The humid Atlanta air clung to my skin, but inside I had never felt so entirely unburdened. Years of gaslighting, of being told I was too demanding, too aggressive, or too emotional evaporated into the warm breeze. I walked into the grand foyer, the clicking of my heels echoing off the marble floors. The house was already half empty, stripped of its pretentious luxury. Brenda was barking orders at a mover carrying a crystal chandelier, her voice sharp with panic. Marcus and Jessica were furiously stuffing designer shoes and handbags into leather suitcases near the sweeping staircase. They looked disheveled, their usual polished arrogance completely shattered by the reality of their impending homelessness. "Careful with that!" Jessica shrieked at a mover. "Those are imported Italian leather!" She looked up and spotted me standing near the doorway, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. "Are you here to gloat, Nia? Are you here to watch us suffer? You are a monster. You destroyed this entire family just to feed your own bitter ego." "I am here to ensure the property is vacated by the deadline," I stated calmly, crossing my arms. "You have exactly 40 minutes left before my security team physically removes anyone still standing inside these walls." Marcus slammed a suitcase shut, the zipper catching violently. "You already took the cars, Nia. You took the business. Dad is sitting in a federal holding cell because of you. What more do you want? Do you want blood?" "I want exactly what is legally mine," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You made your choices, Marcus. You forged my signature and Dad's signature to secure fraudulent loans. You gambled away the money. I am simply the consequence you never bothered to prepare for." Before Marcus could formulate another pathetic excuse, the heavy oak front doors swung open entirely. The movers stepped aside as three individuals in dark suits walked into the foyer. They moved with absolute authority, their expressions serious and unyielding. Two uniformed police officers followed closely behind them, blocking the main exit. The sudden silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of packing tape being ripped from a dispenser in the other room. The lead detective, a tall man with a stern face and a silver badge clipped to his belt, stepped forward. His eyes scanned the room before locking onto my brother. "Marcus Wilson," he asked, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Marcus froze, his hands trembling as he released the handle of his suitcase. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. "Yes," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "That is me. What is this about?" "I am Detective Harrison with the Financial Crimes Division," the man stated, pulling a folded document from his jacket pocket. "We have a warrant for your arrest." Brenda let out a sharp, devastated cry, dropping a velvet jewelry box onto the floor. "Arrest for what? My son has done nothing wrong. This is a misunderstanding. What your brother did constitutes multiple felonies: forgery, fraud, filing, false documents, identity theft," I said softly, looking directly at Marcus as the detective approached him. "Each charge carries significant penalties." Detective Harrison nodded, confirming my statement. "Marcus Wilson, you are under arrest for 2 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of identity theft, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The uniformed officers stepped forward, roughly pulling Marcus's arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists sounded like a gunshot in the quiet foyer. Marcus did not fight them. He simply went limp, his shoulders slumping as the reality of his impending prison sentence crashed down upon him. He was no longer the golden boy of Buckhead, the heir apparent who could do no wrong. He was just a common criminal, caught in a trap of his own arrogant making. "No, you cannot do this!" Jessica shrieked, launching herself forward. She grabbed the detective's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. "He is innocent. She set him up. Jessica pointed a trembling accusatory finger directly at me. Ma'am, step back immediately, or you will be arrested for obstructing an officer, Detective Harrison warned, prying her hands off his arm. Jessica stumbled backward, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. She turned her absolute fury entirely on me, resorting to the ugliest tactics she knew. "You vindictive, jealous witch!" she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You did this! You are ruining a black man's life! You could not handle that! He was building an empire, so you tore him down! You are playing right into the system, destroying your own brother out of pure spite!" I did not flinch. I slowly walked toward her, closing the distance until I was standing just inches away. I looked down at her, maintaining absolute authority. "Do not ever try to weaponize our race to cover up your husband's crimes," I stated, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper that cut through her hysterics. "Marcus is not a successful businessman. He is a thief who stole from his own sister. He forged my signature on sales documents listing himself as having power of attorney." I turned my gaze to Brenda, who was sobbing uncontrollably against the marble staircase. And he did not do it alone. The district attorney had added charges of conspiracy against them for knowingly witnessing fraudulent documents. "You signed those fake deeds as a witness, Brenda. You enabled his felonies because you wanted to protect his fragile ego. The detectives will be returning for you next." Brenda gasped, covering her mouth, as the full weight of her complicity became undeniable. She had sacrificed my future to protect Marcus, and now that very decision was going to send her to a federal penitentiary. "You took my intellectual property, you leveraged my home, and you drained my accounts." I continued, turning back to Jessica. "I did not ruin his life. I simply stopped letting him ruin mine. Take him away, detective." The officers hauled Marcus toward the open front doors. He stumbled over the threshold, his head hung low in absolute shame, passing by the moving boxes that contained the last remnants of his fake, privileged life. Jessica collapsed onto a leather suitcase, weeping loudly as she watched her meal ticket get shoved into the back of a waiting police cruiser. Her influencer brand was dead. Her husband was a felon. She had absolutely nothing left. I checked my watch. "You have exactly 15 minutes to get off my property," I announced to the weeping women. "I strongly suggest you carry whatever bags you can manage and start walking. The security gates lock at noon." I turned my back on them and walked toward the kitchen to pour myself a glass of cold water. I did not look out the window as the police cars drove away, their sirens blaring down the manicured streets. I had spent 34 years being the designated punching bag for a family that viewed my success as an insult to their mediocrity. Today, the golden child was sitting in a jail cell, and the scapegoat owned the entire kingdom. The eviction was complete. The house was quiet. The toxic cycle was finally broken. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the cold water, letting the silence of the massive house wash over me. I was no longer the forgotten daughter, hiding in the shadows of their delusions. I was the architect of my own destiny, firmly standing on the solid foundation of my unyielding independence, ready to embrace the beautiful, hard-earned peace of my new life. The beautiful, hard-earned peace of my new life was abruptly interrupted at exactly 2 in the morning. My private phone vibrated against the mahogany nightstand. I glanced at the screen and saw the building concierge calling. I answered, my voice still raspy with sleep. He apologized profusely for the late hour, but informed me that my own mother and sister-in-law were currently in the lobby, weeping hysterically and causing a very massive disturbance. I could have told security to escort them out, but a part of me knew this midnight ambush was the inevitable final chapter. I instructed the concierge to send them up. The private elevator opened directly into my foyer. The polished marble floors and crystal lighting stood in stark contrast to the 2 disheveled women who stumbled out. Brenda and Jessica looked entirely unrecognizable. The absolute arrogance they had displayed earlier today had completely evaporated, replaced by a raw, pathetic desperation. Brenda collapsed onto her knees the moment she saw me standing in the hallway in my silk robe. "Nia, please," she sobbed, holding her hands together as if in prayer. "You have to help us. You are the only one left with any money. Calvin's bail is set at $500,000, and they froze all of his accounts." Jessica pushed past Brenda, tears streaming down her face as she reached out to grab my arm. I took a sharp step back, refusing to let her touch me. Marcus needs a lawyer, Jessica pleaded, her voice cracking with panic. A criminal defense attorney. The public defender told us he is looking at serious federal prison time for the wire fraud and forgery. You have to drop the charges, Nia. Please, I am begging you. Families help each other. I stared at them, absorbing the absolute hypocrisy of their midnight visit. Your family is hoping you will fall back into old patterns. They are counting on your desire for harmony to override your need for justice, but setting boundaries isn't vindictive, it is healthy, I thought to myself. You did not care about family when Calvin stole my startup capital. You did not care about family when Marcus forged my signature. You only care about family now because you are out of options. We made terrible mistakes, Brenda cried, burying her face in her hands. We were blind, Nia. We favored your brother and we failed you. But we are blood. You cannot leave your own father and brother to rot in a jail cell. It is cruel. I just want justice and for everyone to understand you cannot steal from family and call it love. I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the vast space. You enabled their crimes for years, Brenda. You sat at the head of that dining room table and demanded I surrender my properties to cover up Calvin's embezzlement. Now that the consequences have finally arrived, you want me to write a blank check to make it all disappear. I will do anything, Jessica wailed, dropping to the floor beside Brenda. I will sign the spa over to you. I will give you a public apology on all my platforms. Just pay Marcus's bail and hire him a defense team. He is your brother. You cannot let them ruin a black man's life like this. He ruined his own life, Jessica, I corrected her sharply. He committed federal felonies. He forged deeds, stole intellectual property, and committed identity theft. I am not the villain in this story. I am simply the consequence you refused to prepare for. I walked over to the kitchen island and poured myself a glass of cold water. They had genuinely believed that their needs outweighed my rights, a fundamental value difference that I could understand without accepting. For 34 years, they operated under the delusion that my success was a communal resource, something to be plundered whenever Marcus or Calvin failed. They came here tonight hoping to trigger my old conditioning, hoping I would revert to the compliant, useful daughter who fixed their messes. Please, Nia, Brenda whispered, her voice hoarse. Forgive us. Just forgive us and help your family. I looked at my mother, seeing the years of manipulation finally catching up to her. Forgiveness is for your peace, not their comfort, I told her softly. I do forgive you, Brenda. I forgive all of you for the decades of neglect and betrayal. I am letting go of the anger because carrying it only poisons my own life. But forgiving you does not mean I am going to finance your salvation. It does not mean I am going to rescue men who intentionally tried to ruin my future. You are a monster, Jessica hissed, her true nature momentarily piercing through the desperate tears. You are sitting up here in this luxury penthouse while your family loses everything. I am sitting up here because I built this life with my own hands, I countered firmly. While you were maxing out fraudulent credit cards and Marcus was gambling away stolen funds, I was working. I am not giving you a single cent for bail. You have 2 minutes to get back into that elevator before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Brenda let out a heartbroken wail, realizing the absolute finality of my decision. The bank accounts were frozen, the social standing was destroyed, and the scapegoat had locked the vault. Jessica grabbed Brenda's arm, pulling the older woman to her feet. They stumbled backward toward the elevator, their faces twisted in a mixture of profound grief and lingering resentment. They finally understood that the kingdom they thought they ruled was entirely gone. You will absolutely regret this, Brenda sobbed as the heavy elevator doors slowly began to slide shut. You will be entirely alone. I am not alone, I replied as the polished metal doors smoothly closed, permanently cutting off her final words. I finally have myself. The morning sun pierced the windows of my attorney's downtown conference room, casting sharp shadows across the mahogany table. I sat at the head, flanked by my corporate counsel, David, and my criminal defense liaison, Sarah. My tailored suit acted as armor. At 9, the glass doors swung open. Brenda and Jessica walked in, accompanied by their exhausted public defender. They looked entirely different from the arrogant women who sneered at me a week ago. Their luxury brands hung awkwardly on defeated frames, faces pale from the terrifying reality of federal indictments. They took their seats opposite me without uttering a word. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rustle of Sarah organizing legal documents. I looked directly at Jessica, who kept her eyes fixed on the wood table. Brenda was trembling, clutching a crumpled tissue. They had spent their entire lives treating me as an endless resource to be exploited. Today they would finally understand the true cost of their entitlement. "Thank you for coming." I began projecting absolute authority. "We are here to discuss a potential resolution regarding the pending criminal charges against Marcus and Calvin. As you are fully aware, the district attorney has gathered insurmountable evidence of multiple felonies. The federal sentencing guidelines for these financial crimes suggest a minimum of 10 years in a penitentiary for both of them." Brenda let out a strangled sob. Jessica flinched, gripping the armrests. Their public defender cleared his throat, attempting to project confidence. "My clients are prepared to listen to settlement offers, Ms. Wilson. However, they maintain the situation escalated due to unfortunate misunderstandings." David offered a cold smile. "There is no misunderstanding when someone deliberately forges a signature to leverage a multi-million-dollar property. There is no ambiguity in embezzling sanctuary funds. My client is operating from a position of absolute legal leverage. She is not here to negotiate. She is here to present terms." I leaned forward. "I am prepared to formally petition the district attorney to drop the forgery and fraud charges against Marcus. Furthermore, I will withdraw my witness cooperation in the federal embezzlement case against Calvin, severely weakening the prosecution's stance." Jessica's head snapped up, a flicker of desperate hope momentarily erasing her exhaustion. "You would actually drop the charges?" "I would," I confirmed smoothly. "But my leniency comes with a non-negotiable price. You are going to sign the documents currently sitting in front of my legal team." Sarah slid two black leather binders across the mahogany surface. They stopped precisely in front of Brenda and Jessica. "What are these?" Brenda asked, her voice wavering with deep suspicion. "The cost of your freedom," I explained deliberately. "Inside those binders are comprehensive, legally binding non-disclosure agreements. By signing them, you are strictly prohibited from ever discussing me, my businesses, my personal assets, or the events of the past week with any media outlet, journalist, social media platform, or mutual acquaintance." Jessica glared at me, her arrogance attempting a futile resurgence. "You are trying to silence us. You want to make sure nobody knows how ruthlessly you destroyed your own family." "I am ensuring you never profit from my name again," I corrected her sharply. "But the NDA is only the first part. The second document is a permanent relinquishment of rights. You, Marcus, Calvin, and Brenda will sign away any and all future claims to my estate, my holding companies, my trusts, and my personal wealth. You will legally sever yourselves from my financial legacy forever." Brenda gasped, looking at her public defender in absolute panic. "She cannot do this. This is blackmail. We are her family. She cannot force us to sign away our rights to the family estate." "It is no longer the family estate, Brenda," I reminded her coldly. "It is my estate. You lost everything because of your own greed and criminality. You are currently facing federal prison, public humiliation, and total financial ruin. I am offering you a singular chance to keep your husband and your golden boy out of a concrete cell. In exchange, you will disappear from my life entirely and permanently." The public defender leaned over, whispering frantically to Jessica and Brenda. I watched realization wash over their faces as he explained the grim reality of their situation. They had no leverage, no hidden assets, and no powerful friends left to bail them out. Jessica slammed her fist onto the table, tears of pure frustration spilling over her eyelashes. "You are a monster, Nia. You planned this whole thing just to leave us with nothing." "I gave you exactly what you gave me for 34 years," I stated softly, my voice completely devoid of empathy. "Nothing. Now you have exactly 60 seconds to pick up those pens and sign the documents, or I will instruct Sarah to call the district attorney and expedite Marcus's transfer to a maximum security facility." Silence heavily blanketed the room, thick and suffocating. Brenda broke first. With a shaking hand, she reached for the silver pen, her tears falling freely onto the crisp white paper as she signed her name, officially surrendering her entitlement. Jessica hesitated, her jaw clenched in furious resistance. But the image of Marcus in a prison jumpsuit ultimately broke her pride. She snatched the pen and signed aggressively, pushing the binder away as if it burned her. I watched them finalize the signatures, feeling an incredible, overwhelming sense of absolute liberation wash through my entire being. The heavy chains of emotional manipulation were finally completely severed. I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket with deliberate, slow precision. "We are officially done," I announced, looking down at the broken women who had spent decades trying to break me. "Do not ever contact me again." I turned my back on them and walked out of the conference room. I did not look back once. I stepped into the elevator, watching the numbers descend toward the lobby, knowing I was rising toward an unburdened future. The heavy metal doors of the county detention center swung open precisely at noon. Marcus stepped out into the bright Atlanta sunlight, wearing the same rumpled designer suit he had been arrested in days ago. Jessica was waiting for him by the curb in a rented sedan, the luxury cars having been seized by the bank. She did not rush forward to embrace him. Instead, she pushed the passenger door open from the inside, her face tight with suppressed anger. Marcus slid into the seat, slamming the door shut. He rubbed his wrists where the handcuffs had left faint red marks. "I cannot believe we signed away everything to that vindictive woman," Jessica hissed aggressively, merging into traffic. "We surrendered our rights to a billion-dollar empire just to keep you out of a cell. We have absolutely nothing left, Marcus. We are living in a cheap motel, while your sister throws her massive corporate gala this weekend." Marcus stared out the window, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscle fluttered. The fear that had kept him compliant in the conference room was already evaporating, rapidly replaced by a toxic, festering resentment. Nia thought she had broken him. She thought the non-disclosure agreements and the relinquishment documents were ironclad cages that would keep him permanently subdued. She underestimated his absolute refusal to accept defeat. "We are not finished," Marcus said. "Nia is hosting her inaugural corporate gala this Saturday. It is her crowning achievement. Her company relies on an exclusive, highly confidential client list." Marcus explained, his eyes gleaming. "If that list falls into the hands of her biggest rival, Vanguard Global, it would destroy her. Her clients would sue her into oblivion." "How do we get it?" Jessica asked him. "We are locked out." "I installed a hidden network bridge when I lived there," Marcus revealed. "If we get close enough to the property to pick up the wireless signal, I can bypass her firewall and download the master database directly from her laptop." The plan was reckless and completely driven by his spite. Jessica pulled into the parking lot of their dingy motel. The prospect of destroying Nia's triumph was too intoxicating to resist. "Vanguard will pay millions," Jessica murmured. "We could take the money and leave Atlanta." "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "By the time she steps up to the podium, her empire will be bleeding out." They purchased a specialized wireless signal booster and an encrypted hard drive using their last emergency cash. They spent hours sitting in a rented van parked down the street from the mansion. Marcus possessed a rudimentary understanding of network security, just enough to be dangerous. On Friday night, the eve of the gala, the weather turned miserable. Heavy rain lashed against the windshield of the van as they parked in the shadows of the mansion's towering oak trees. The iron gates were securely locked, but the signal booster flashed green, indicating a connection to the hidden router Marcus had installed months ago. "I am in," Marcus whispered. The screen illuminated his face in a pale, ghostly light. "Bypassing the two-factor authentication now." Jessica leaned over his shoulder, her breath catching in her throat. "Hurry up. If her security team notices the bandwidth spike, they will trace it straight to us." "They will not notice," Marcus said confidently. "I am masking the download as a standard system update. Here we go, accessing the client database." Rows of highly sensitive data began cascading down the screen. Names, corporate accounts, routing numbers, and private shipping manifests belonging to politicians, celebrities, and international conglomerates. It was the absolute lifeblood of the company. Marcus initiated the transfer, watching the progress bar slowly fill. 10%, 30%, 50%. The progress bar halted. A red warning message flashed across the screen. "What happened?" Jessica demanded. "Did she catch us?" Marcus furiously tapped the keyboard. No, the connection is just weak due to the heavy storm. I just need to boost the signal. He adjusted the antenna on the dashboard, holding his breath as the progress bar slowly resumed its crawl. 80%, 90%, complete. We got it. Marcus exhaled, unplugging the hard drive. He looked at Jessica, a triumphant, wicked smile on his face. We have the entire kingdom right here in my hand. They drove back to the motel in silence, the heavy rain washing away their tire tracks. They immediately drafted an anonymous email to the chief executive officer of Vanguard Global, attaching a small sample of the stolen data as proof of authenticity. They demanded $3 million for the complete list untraceable cryptocurrency transferred to an offshore wallet. Saturday evening arrived with crisp, clear skies perfectly setting the stage for the corporate gala. Nia had spared no expense transforming the botanical gardens into a breathtaking wonderland of crystal lights and exotic floral arrangements. String quartets played softly as Atlanta's elite mingled, sipping vintage champagne. Marcus and Jessica sat in their motel room, refreshing their email inbox every few seconds. They had received a response from Vanguard Global earlier that afternoon. The rival executive was highly interested and agreed to the price pending a final verification of the files. They were minutes away from completing the transaction. Check it again, Jessica urged, pacing the small room. Marcus hit refresh. An email appeared, but it was not from Vanguard Global. The sender address was encrypted, but the subject line made Marcus's blood run completely cold. What does it say? Jessica asked, stopping in her tracks. Marcus opened the email. It contained a single high-definition photograph. It was a picture of Marcus and Jessica sitting in their rented van outside the mansion in the pouring rain, illuminated by the glow of the laptop screen. Beneath the photo was a short, devastating message. Did you really think I would not monitor my own network? Vanguard Global actually works directly for me. I will see you at the gala tonight. I hit send on the encrypted email from my secure terminal inside the mansion and watched the live surveillance feed on my monitor. The night vision cameras captured every detail inside the rented van parked on the street. I watched the color completely drain from my brother's face as he read my message. Jessica covered her mouth with trembling hands, her eyes wide with panic. They genuinely believed they had outsmarted me. They thought they had infiltrated my highly secure network to steal my most valuable corporate assets. They had absolutely no idea that I had orchestrated the entire scenario from the moment they parked near my gates. My head of cybersecurity, David, stood right beside my chair with his arms crossed over his chest. He had alerted me to the unauthorized network bridge 2 hours ago when Marcus first initiated the connection. David reached for his keyboard to block the intrusion and lock down the firewall immediately. I had placed my hand over his wrist and told him to wait. I wanted to see how far my brother was willing to go to destroy my life. Instead of stopping them, I instructed David to create a mirrored server environment. We let them bypass the outer security layers while we quietly moved the genuine client databases offline. In their place, David uploaded a fake client list containing tracking software. Marcus thought he was downloading the lifeblood of my logistics empire. In reality, he was downloading a digital Trojan horse that immediately infected his encrypted hard drive and mapped every single keystroke on his laptop. The tracking software documented his exact location, his IP address, and subsequent communications. I watched the data transfer in real time, witnessing my brother commit corporate espionage. I remembered a conversation I had with my legal counsel earlier this week about his previous crimes. My lawyer explained the severity of the situation perfectly. What your brother did constitutes multiple felonies, including forgery, fraud, filing false documents, and identity theft. Each charge carries significant penalties. Now he had added federal cybercrimes and corporate espionage to his rapidly growing list of offenses. The sheer audacity of his actions was staggering. He had broken into my system trying to steal my livelihood to sell to a competitor, all while living in a cheap motel because I had rightfully evicted him. He believed that family ties somehow insulated him from the consequences of his malicious behavior. My mother had always enabled this delusion. She had constantly demanded that I forgive his trespasses because he was family. But I knew the truth. I just want justice, and for everyone to understand you cannot steal from family and call it love. I turned away from the security monitors and walked out of the control room. The mansion was quiet, the heavy oak doors and thick walls, absorbing the sounds of the severe thunderstorm raging outside. I walked down the sweeping marble staircase, trailing my hand along the polished mahogany banister. Tomorrow was Saturday, the day of my inaugural corporate gala. The botanical gardens were already being transformed into a spectacular venue for Atlanta's elite. Vanguard Global, the rival firm Marcus thought he was conspiring with, was actually a subsidiary I had quietly acquired 3 months ago. Their chief executive officer reported directly to me. When Marcus sent that extortion email demanding $3 million in untraceable cryptocurrency, the executive had forwarded it to my personal inbox within seconds. Marcus had handed me the final piece of evidence I needed to completely dismantle him. He had walked right into the trap driven by his insatiable greed and toxic resentment. I walked into the grand kitchen and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. The rain lashed against the large windows, washing the manicured grounds in a relentless deluge. I felt a profound sense of calm settling over my entire body. I was not anxious about the gala. I was not worried about the impending confrontation. I was entirely prepared for the final act of this long, exhausting saga. The next morning, the storm cleared, leaving behind a crisp, brilliantly sunny sky. I spent the day coordinating with my event planners, ensuring every crystal glass and floral arrangement was perfect. I wanted the gala to be a flawless representation of my success, a stark contrast to the absolute ruin my brother had brought upon himself. I wore a custom emerald green evening gown that commanded attention. As my private driver navigated the limousine toward the botanical gardens, my phone buzzed with an alert from David. The tracking software confirmed that Marcus and Jessica were currently driving toward the venue. They were actually going to show up. They were going to walk into a room filled with my clients, my investors, and my allies, completely unaware that the ground beneath them had already collapsed. I stepped out of the limousine and onto the red carpet. Photographers flashed their cameras as I walked past the velvet ropes. The string quartet played a lively symphony that echoed through the beautifully illuminated gardens. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne, and the city's most powerful figures mingled under the sparkling canopy of lights. I took my place near the center of the main ballroom, accepting congratulations on my recent corporate expansion. I kept my posture straight and my smile radiant, playing the role of the gracious host to absolute perfection. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw them enter. Marcus wore a cheap rented tuxedo that did not fit properly across his shoulders. Jessica wore an outdated cocktail dress, her posture rigid with nervous energy. They scanned the room, their eyes darting through the crowd, until they finally locked onto me. Marcus offered a very smug, arrogant smirk, entirely convinced he held the power to destroy my empire tonight. He thought he was the apex predator stalking his prey. He had absolutely no idea he was already caught in the snare, bleeding out. I turned away from Marcus and Jessica, allowing them to bask in their false confidence for just a little while longer. The grand ballroom of the Botanical Gardens was a sea of crystal chandeliers, cascading white orchids, and the soft hum of classical music. Waiters navigated through the crowd, carrying trays of vintage champagne and delicate hot appetizers. I mingled with my investors, smiling warmly and discussing the upcoming quarterly projections for Apex Luxury Logistics. The atmosphere was a perfect reflection of my hard work and relentless dedication. I had built this empire from the ground up entirely without the support of the people who were currently stalking the perimeter of the room. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed my parents, Calvin and Brenda, making their entrance. They had clearly spared no expense for their uninvited arrival. Calvin wore a tailored tuxedo that attempted to mask his recent legal troubles, while Brenda was draped in a sequined gown, her neck adorned with pearls she had likely borrowed. They joined Marcus and Jessica, forming a tight, menacing circle near the main ice sculpture. They moved with the aggressive entitlement of people who truly believed they still held power over me. I politely excused myself from a conversation with two prominent venture capitalists and glided toward the center of the room. I knew exactly what Marcus was planning to do. He was waiting for the perfect moment to maximize my public humiliation. He wanted an audience. He wanted to destroy my credibility in front of the very people who funded my success. I reached the elevated acrylic podium positioned near the string quartet. I tapped the microphone twice. The sharp sound easily cut through the sophisticated chatter, bringing the vast room to an immediate and expectant silence. Thank you all for joining me this evening to celebrate the incredible expansion of Apex Luxury Logistics, I announced, projecting absolute confidence. Before I could continue my welcoming remarks, Marcus pushed his way through the crowd of elegantly dressed guests. Jessica was right behind him, holding a sleek silver tablet high in the air, as if it were a holy relic. Calvin and Brenda followed closely, their faces twisted into identical expressions of smug satisfaction. The wealthy attendees parted awkwardly, their polite smiles instantly replaced by looks of severe confusion. Marcus stopped directly in front of the podium. "Do not listen to a single word she says!" Marcus shouted, his voice echoing violently across the ballroom. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. "Nia Wilson is a complete fraud. She built this entire company on lies, and I have the absolute proof right here in my hands." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My primary investors exchanged highly concerned glances. Brenda stepped forward, placing a theatrical hand over her heart. "It breaks my heart to expose my own daughter," she cried out, ensuring her voice carried to the back of the room. "But we cannot allow her to deceive you fine people any longer. She stole from her family, and now she is stealing from you." I maintained my composure, resting my hands lightly on the edges of the podium. I did not flinch. "Marcus, you are trespassing," I stated clearly. "I strongly suggest you and your wife leave my corporate event before I have security escort you out." "Security cannot save you from the truth, Nia," Jessica shrieked, tapping the screen of her silver tablet. "We have your master client database, we have your confidential financial records, and we just sent them to every single investor in this room." Simultaneously, the cell phones of dozens of investors and corporate partners began to chime and vibrate. The room descended into immediate chaos as people pulled out their devices to examine the incoming emails. Marcus smirked triumphantly, crossing his arms over his cheap rented tuxedo. "Look at your screens, ladies and gentlemen," he commanded the room. "Look at the disastrous financial liability you have invested your money into, a senior partner from Vanguard Global." The subsidiary firm I secretly owned frowned at his phone. He stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Wilson," the executive said, his voice entirely devoid of panic. "This email contains nothing but recipes for sourdough bread and hundreds of pictures of golden retrievers wearing sunglasses." Marcus froze. The arrogant smirk instantly evaporated from his face. "What?" he stammered frantically, grabbing the tablet from Jessica's hands. "No, that is entirely impossible. I downloaded the master files myself. I bypassed the firewall." Laughter began to spread through the ballroom. It started as a low murmur and quickly swelled into outright amusement. The elite crowd of investors realized they were witnessing a pathetic stunt rather than a corporate crisis. Jessica grabbed Marcus's arm, her face turning a mottled shade of red. "You downloaded a mirrored server file," I explained, my voice booming through the microphone. "Did you really think my cybersecurity team would leave the actual master database unprotected? You stole a decoy file, Marcus." I signaled my lead security officer. "Furthermore, the file you downloaded contained advanced tracking software. It recorded your exact location, your IP address, and every keystroke you made while attempting to commit corporate espionage from your motel room." Calvin stepped backward, the color completely draining from his face as he realized his son had just publicly confessed to a severe federal crime. "You set us up!" Marcus yelled, his voice cracking with absolute panic. "You are an actual criminal, Marcus," I replied coldly. "You brought this upon yourself. Officers, please escort these trespassers out of my venue." 4 uniformed police officers, whom I had stationed discreetly near the kitchen entrances, marched directly toward my family. Brenda wailed loudly, clinging to Calvin's arm as the officers surrounded them. Jessica burst into hysterical tears, dropping the silver tablet onto the marble floor. I watched with absolute cold detachment as the heavily armed police aggressively marched my incredibly deceitful family out of the grand ballroom, finally and permanently removing their toxic presence. As the officers gripped his arms, Marcus violently thrashed backward and slammed his palm onto the master synchronization button on his silver tablet. He was desperate to inflict one final blow against my reputation before the authorities could remove him from the premises. He screamed that everyone needed to look at the massive presentation screens mounted above the main stage. He genuinely believed he had successfully bypassed my security protocols and was about to broadcast my highly confidential client list to the entire room. The giant digital displays flickered to life, bathing the elegant botanical garden ballroom in harsh bright light. The string quartet remained silent. Hundreds of wealthy attendees turned their heads upward, expecting to see the disastrous financial liability my brother promised to reveal. Instead, high-definition security footage of Marcus and Jessica breaking into Nia's office plays for the entire room. The crisp video left nothing to the imagination. The enormous screens displayed Marcus aggressively jimmying the lock of my private corporate suite late at night. The camera angle perfectly captured the sweat beading on his forehead and the frantic, guilty expression on his face. Jessica was visible standing watch by the heavy glass doors, nervously chewing her fingernails while clutching a flashlight. The footage showed them rummaging through my mahogany desk drawers, throwing confidential files onto the floor, and frantically plugging an unauthorized flash drive into my primary workstation. The crystal-clear audio caught Jessica complaining about her broken heel and Marcus cursing loudly as he struggled to navigate the unfamiliar operating system. It was not a sophisticated corporate espionage operation. It was a pathetic burglary committed by two arrogant people who believed they were entirely above the law. The reaction from the ballroom was immediate and unforgiving. The polite amusement from earlier vanished, replaced by a chorus of shocked gasps and disgusted murmurs. A prominent venture capitalist standing near the ice sculpture shook his head in absolute disbelief, muttering about the sheer stupidity of the crime. Marcus stood completely frozen between the two police officers, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He stared at the giant screens, watching his own criminal actions broadcast in glorious high definition to the most powerful people in Atlanta. The tablet slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the marble floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the vast space. Jessica let out a high, piercing shriek and covered her face with both hands, finally realizing that her curated influencer brand was permanently destroyed. Her followers would soon see her not as an entrepreneur, but as a common burglar. My father, Calvin, who had spent his entire adult life obsessing over our family's pristine social standing, physically stumbled backward. He grabbed the edge of a catering table to steady himself, knocking over a crystal champagne flute. The sound of shattering glass punctuated the destruction of his legacy. Brenda covered her mouth, her eyes wide with absolute horror, as she watched her golden boy commit a felony on a 50-foot digital display. "You set a trap for us," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking with pure panic as the police officers tightened their grip on his arms. I stepped back up to the acrylic podium and leaned closely into the microphone, ensuring my voice commanded the entire room. "I did not force you to break into my office, Marcus," I stated calmly, staring directly into his terrified eyes. "I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences of your malicious choices." "You thought you were stealing my master client database to sell to Vanguard Global." I continued addressing my brother while the crowd hung on every word. "But Vanguard Global belongs to me, and the files you downloaded were heavily encrypted decoys. The exact moment you plugged that illegal flash drive into my terminal, the tracking software activated. It immediately overrode your tablet's operating system and cued this security footage to play whenever you attempted to broadcast the stolen data. You wanted a public spectacle, Marcus. You demanded an audience. Now you have one." The lead police officer pulled Marcus forward sharply, instructing him to stop resisting. "We have seen enough," the officer declared loudly. "Marcus Wilson and Jessica Wilson, you are both facing additional charges for breaking and entering corporate espionage and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you start utilizing that right immediately. They were aggressively dragged toward the main exit, completely stripped of their dignity and their unearned arrogance. Brenda wept uncontrollably, clinging to Calvin's arm as they followed the police officers out of the ballroom, their heads bowed in total disgrace. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind them, effectively severing their toxic presence from my life forever. I stood on the stage, looking out at the sea of investors and partners who had just witnessed the absolute dismantling of my abusers. For a brief moment, the silence in the room was heavy, thick with the residual tension of the confrontation. Then the senior partner from Vanguard Global started clapping. Slowly at first, but the applause quickly spread. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted into a standing ovation. They were not applauding the family drama. They were applauding my absolute, uncompromising strength and my ability to aggressively protect the empire I had built with my own hands. I raised my hand gently, signaling for quiet. The applause faded, replaced by an atmosphere of profound respect. "Thank you," I said, a genuine smile finally crossing my face. In business as in life, true security comes from independence. We must refuse to allow toxic elements to drain our potential, no matter how closely related they might be. Tonight, we do not mourn the loss of dead weight. We celebrate the limitless potential of the future. I signaled the string quartet. The musicians immediately resumed playing a joyful, uplifting symphony. Waiters circulated with fresh champagne. The dark cloud had lifted from my shoulders, and the rest of the inaugural party was absolutely spectacular. The music swelled, filling the grand ballroom with a triumphant melody that stood in sharp contrast to the scene unfolding near the double doors. While my guests returned to their conversations, their eyes remained locked on the disgraceful exit of the people who had once called themselves my family. The investors watched with unconcealed disgust. They had zero tolerance for the pathetic criminality they had just witnessed on the 50-foot digital displays. Marcus dug his heels into the marble floor, his cheap rented tuxedo bunching around his shoulders as two armed police officers dragged him backward. The reality of his situation had finally crushed his unearned bravado, leaving him breathless and panicking. Brenda walked behind him, her face buried in her hands, her theatrical sobs echoing over the string quartet. She stumbled over the hem of her borrowed sequined gown, but the officers did not slow their pace to accommodate her dramatic performance. Calvin walked beside her in total silence, looking like a hollow shell of the booming patriarch he once was. Jessica, however, refused to go quietly. She thrashed against the grip of the female officer escorting her, her perfectly styled hair now a tangled mess around her tear-streaked face. "Get your hands off me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you have any idea who my father is? He will have your badges by tomorrow morning. He is a senior partner." She craned her neck, scanning the sea of guests, her eyes wide with frantic hope. She was searching for her ultimate safety net, the man who funded her entitlement. As if summoned by her screams, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair stepped out from the crowd of onlookers near the champagne fountain. He wore an immaculate bespoke suit and carried a crystal tumbler of scotch. It was Arthur Sterling, Jessica's father. As a prominent corporate attorney, his presence at an elite business gala was expected, but his current expression of cold, calculating fury was a departure from his usual polished charm. He had spent the last hour networking with my primary investors, only to watch his daughter broadcast her felony, breaking and entering to the entire room. "Daddy!" Jessica shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the foyer as the police hauled her closer to the exit. "Daddy, tell them to let me go. Tell them this is a huge mistake. Nia set us up. You have to call the district attorney right now and fix this." Arthur Sterling did not rush forward to embrace his distressed daughter. He did not pull out his phone to call his powerful contacts in the justice system. He simply stood there, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscle fluttered beneath his skin. He looked at the police officers, then at the massive digital screens paused on a high-definition frame of his daughter, illegally downloading stolen data, and finally down at Jessica. The silence that stretched between them was heavy. "You expect me to fix this?" Arthur asked, his voice dangerously low, yet carrying perfectly across the quieted foyer. You just committed corporate espionage, grand larceny, and felony breaking and entering on a recorded security feed in front of 36 of my most important clients. You conspired to steal intellectual property to cover up your husband's fraudulent bridge loan, a loan secured by a forged deed. Jessica froze, her hysterical crying hitching in her throat. Daddy, please! She whimpered, her arrogant influencer persona entirely stripped away, leaving behind a terrified child who had pushed the boundaries too far. I am your daughter. You have to represent me. You have to save me from her. She pointed a shaking finger back toward the stage where I stood observing the confrontation. Arthur slowly shook his head, his expression transforming into a mask of pure professional preservation. I represent individuals and corporations with viable defenses, he stated coldly, projecting his voice so every investor in the room could hear his definitive stance. I do not represent liabilities. My firm relies on absolute integrity. Associating myself with this display of criminal stupidity would compromise the reputation I have spent 40 years building. You made your choices, Jessica. You chose to marry a fraud and you chose to become a thief. Do not call my office. The absolute finality of his public disowning hit Jessica with the force of a physical blow. Her legs gave out and she collapsed against the police officer holding her arm, letting out a guttural, devastating wail that contained no theatricality. It was the sound of true, undeniable ruin. She had always believed her father's wealth and status made her untouchable. In an instant, she realized that his status was exactly why he was abandoning her to the authorities. In the corporate world, liabilities are cut loose. Take them out of here, Arthur instructed the officers, casually taking a sip of his scotch and turning his back on his weeping daughter. The police did not hesitate. They dragged the sobbing, defeated remnants of my abusers out through the double doors, shoving them into the warm Atlanta night. Through the towering glass windows of the ballroom, the attendees watched silently as Marcus, Jessica, Calvin, and Brenda were loaded into 3 waiting police cruisers. The flashing red and blue lights painted the botanical gardens in chaotic colors before the cruisers pulled away, their sirens fading. I remained on the stage, taking a slow, deep breath of the fragrant eucalyptus-scented air. The heavy burden I had carried for 34 years was entirely gone. I walked down the acrylic steps and rejoined my guests. No one offered me pity or awkward condolences. Instead, the venture capitalists raised their glasses in genuine respect, acknowledging a woman who possessed the strategic brilliance and unwavering strength to protect her empire at all costs. I accepted a fresh glass of vintage champagne and smiled, ready to build my legacy without ever looking back. Exactly 30 days had passed since the corporate gala where my family's facade completely crumbled. The crisp morning air of Buckhead felt unusually sharp as I parked my black Mercedes across the street from the sweeping iron gates of the mansion I legally owned. I rolled down the tinted window just enough to let in the breeze, wrapping my hands around a warm cup of espresso. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of wealthy silence that only comes from sprawling estates and heavy security. But today, that silence was about to be broken by the harsh reality of consequences. The legal eviction mandate had officially expired at exactly midnight. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my double espresso, savoring the bitter richness, as 2 marked sheriff's cruisers pulled into the circular driveway. The flashing blue lights reflected off the manicured hedges and the grand marble fountain, signaling the absolute end of the Wilson family's stolen kingdom. 4 uniformed officers stepped out of their vehicles, their expressions all business. They did not care about the prestigious address or the architectural grandeur of the colonial home. They walked up the sweeping marble steps and pounded heavily on the heavy oak double doors. I watched from the comfort of my leather seat, feeling a profound sense of detachment. I had spent my entire childhood inside those walls, suffocating under Brenda's criticisms and Calvin's conditional affection. I had watched Marcus crash luxury cars and Jessica parade around in designer gowns bought with my stolen intellectual property. Now the fortress of their unearned entitlement was being legally breached. The massive front doors swung open, revealing frantic movement inside. The stern officers stepped directly into the grand foyer, presenting the final non-negotiable court orders to the ruined family. 10 minutes later, the harsh reality of their desperate situation spilled out onto the wide front porch. Marcus emerged first. The former golden boy was completely unrecognizable today. He wore a wrinkled, faded tracksuit, his broad shoulders slumped forward in absolute defeat. I was not carrying expensive designer luggage or tailored garment bags. Instead, he lugged two incredibly heavy black plastic trash bags over his shoulder. The sheriffs had given them exactly 15 minutes to gather whatever personal necessities they could physically carry, strictly forbidding the unauthorized removal of any art furniture or expensive fixtures that legally belonged to the estate. Marcus dropped the bulky trash bags onto the pristine concrete driveway, burying his tear-stained face deep in his trembling hands. He had lost his fraudulent business, his luxury vehicles, and his personal freedom was still hanging by a fragile thread due to the pending federal forgery charges. Jessica followed close behind him, her usual polished influencer persona entirely destroyed. She was weeping uncontrollably, mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks. She dragged a single oversized garbage bag behind her, the cheap plastic catching and tearing forcefully on a stray rosebush branch. The spilled contents, a chaotic jumble of expensive shoes and discarded cosmetics, tumbled out onto the manicured green grass. She scrambled frantically on her knees to pick them up, but a sheriff firmly instructed her to keep moving straight toward the iron gates. Brenda and Calvin appeared last, escorted directly by the lead law enforcement officer. Brenda was clutching her vintage pearl necklace, her face pale and drawn. The arrogant socialite who had constantly demanded absolute perfection and proudly commanded elite church auxiliary boards was being physically removed from her former home in broad daylight, with her remaining belongings stuffed in trash bags. Calvin walked beside her in stunned, defeated silence. The booming patriarch, recently stripped of his prestigious deacon title and currently facing severe federal embezzlement indictments, looked incredibly small and wonderfully fragile. They shuffled down the long driveway, a pathetic parade of ruined arrogance. There was no luxury sedan waiting for them. The bank had seized Calvin's remaining vehicles days ago. They were waiting for a budget rideshare service to take them to a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. As they reached the edge, Marcus looked up and spotted my Mercedes parked across the street. He froze, dropping his trash bags again. He pointed a trembling finger in my direction, alerting the rest of them. Brenda gasped, covering her mouth as she met my gaze through the partially open window. I did not flinch. I did not roll up the window or look away. I stared back at them with absolute unflinching authority. They stood on the sidewalk surrounded by their garbage bags, finally understanding the true magnitude of what they had lost. They had spent 34 years treating me like a designated punching bag, an endless resource to be exploited whenever they failed. They had demanded I surrender my properties to cover up Calvin's embezzlement and expected me to finance Marcus's fraudulent lifestyle. When I refused, they had tried to publicly destroy me. Now they were homeless, disgraced, and entirely dependent on the charity of a system they used to mock. Jessica buried her face in Marcus's shoulder, refusing to look at me. Calvin stared at the pavement, unable to meet the eyes of the daughter he had consistently betrayed. Only Brenda held my gaze, her eyes pleading for a last-minute reprieve, a sudden surge of familial mercy that she had never once extended to me. I raised my cup in a final toast to the people who inadvertently taught me how to be indestructible. I placed the cup in the center console, shifted the car into drive, and smoothly pulled away from the curb. I left them standing there in the morning sun, surrounded by the wreckage of their own terrible choices. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I drove toward the city skyline where my independent empire was thriving, feeling the beautiful, hard-earned peace of absolute freedom. The heavy chains of my past were permanently severed. The mansion was finally empty, the toxic cycle was entirely broken, and my new life was just beginning. The heavy oak doors of the Buckhead mansion swung open effortlessly under my hand, revealing a space that finally belonged entirely to me. For the first time in 30 years, the sprawling colonial estate was completely and wonderfully silent. The security team had finished replacing every single lock, updating the alarm systems, and clearing out the pathetic remnants my family had abandoned in their frantic rush. I stepped into the grand foyer, the sharp click of my designer heels echoing off the pristine marble floor. I walked to the exact center of the room, stopping right where the red envelope had landed just 30 days ago. I closed my eyes and took a long, deep breath. The suffocating weight of my mother, Brenda's harsh criticisms, the cold neglect of my father Calvin, and the unearned arrogance of my brother Marcus had been permanently scrubbed from the atmosphere. I was breathing the crisp, clean air of absolute freedom. My private investigator delivered his final background report later that afternoon, confirming that the toxic chapter of my past was officially closed. The photographs spread across my new glass desk painted a vivid picture of their new reality. My family had been forced to lease a cramped, deeply depressing apartment on the industrial outskirts of the city. The neighborhood was entirely devoid of the manicured hedges and gated driveways they once considered their divine birthright. One photograph captured Marcus and Jessica standing aggressively in a cracked asphalt parking lot, screaming at each other next to a rusted metal fence. Their wrinkled designer clothing looked utterly absurd against the backdrop of a decaying strip mall. Jessica's luxury influencer brand was completely dead, replaced by the harsh, unrelenting reality of shared coin laundry facilities and terribly thin walls. Calvin, forever stripped of his prestigious deacon title and currently awaiting his federal embezzlement trial, was photographed, sitting on a cheap plastic chair on a tiny concrete balcony, staring blankly at the heavy highway traffic. Brenda was nowhere to be seen in any of the pictures. She was likely hiding inside the tiny apartment, completely paralyzed by the overwhelming humiliation of her obliterated social status. Their fake elite empire was reduced to absolute dust. The exclusive country club memberships had been immediately revoked. Their elite church community had permanently banished them, and the wealthy friends they used to entertain simply stopped answering their frantic phone calls. They were entirely isolated, permanently trapped in a miserable prison of their own making, forced to finally endure each other without the comfortable buffer of my stolen money. I felt no pity as I slid the photographs into the shredder. I felt only the profound, brilliant clarity of a woman who had successfully defended her kingdom. I walked out of my office and moved slowly through the empty, sunlit rooms of the mansion. The pale blue walls of my childhood bedroom, the lonely sanctuary where I used to hide from their constant emotional manipulation, were already being prepped by contractors. I was having the entire space painted a vibrant, commanding emerald green. I was not just reclaiming a piece of valuable commercial real estate this week. I was aggressively reclaiming my identity, my boundaries, and my future. My crisis management consulting firm was experiencing unprecedented explosive growth. The highly public dismantling of my brother's fraudulent medical spa venture had inadvertently served as the greatest corporate marketing campaign I could have ever executed. International clients respected a chief executive officer who possessed the strategic brilliance and uncompromising strength to aggressively protect her assets at all costs. My professional calendar was fully booked for the next 3 years, and I was actively interviewing elite candidates to expand my global executive team. I decided to completely renovate the mansion's massive formal dining room. The exact space where Calvin had attempted to stage his pathetic Sunday dinner tribunal was now being transformed into my new corporate boardroom. I ordered a sleek modern glass conference table to permanently replace the antique mahogany and vintage lace. It would be a space dedicated to genuine hard work, absolute transparency, and unyielding integrity, rather than fragile lies and hidden financial crimes. I walked out through the sweeping French doors and stepped onto the expansive stone patio overlooking the manicured grounds and the heated pool. The warm Atlanta sun enveloped me, casting brilliant golden reflections across the crystal-clear water. I poured myself a glass of expensive sparkling water and raised it toward the beautiful, completely empty horizon. I had spent my entire life shrinking myself to make toxic people comfortable. I had financed their ridiculous delusions, swallowed their bitter insults, and waited for an apology that was never going to come. I finally realized that true success does not come from earning the approval of people who are committed to misunderstanding you. True success comes from having the absolute courage to recognize your own worth, the strategic intelligence to build your own independent empire, and the ruthless boundary enforcement required to forcefully remove anyone who tries to tear you down. To anyone watching this video who has ever been the designated black sheep, the forgotten daughter, or the financial safety net for an ungrateful family, let this serve as your ultimate sign. You do not owe your success to people who contributed absolutely nothing but pain to your journey. You have the absolute right to demand respect, and you have the power to easily walk away when that respect is denied. You can break the toxic cycles, protect your guarded peace, and build a beautiful kingdom entirely on your own independent terms. Do not ever let anyone make you feel guilty for claiming what is rightfully yours. Go hit the like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and share this personal story with anyone who desperately needs the courage to finally stand up for themselves. The dramatic eviction process is officially over now, but my extraordinary new life of total independence and undisputed success has only just begun today.